Hello. Welcome back to Moonbeaming. Happy Wednesday. Happy May. I hope you are enjoying yourself now that eclipse season is over. Maybe eclipse season was really good to you. It's almost always really good to me. And we're in my first favorite sequence of the months. I'm coming out as a May lover. I'm coming out as a June lover, coming out as a July lover and a August lover and a September, October lover. I'm going to be real. December, she's a month. She's not my favorite month. January, she also is a month. They're a month. Feb, you also are a month. Not my favorite months though. And we are now in my favorite sequence of months. The sun is out most of the time. The birds are singing. I listened to this really amazing interview that I shared in the newsletter between Bjork and Robin Rose Kimmerer, where they gave a share that there was a study done and people are happier when there is birdsong, especially I think it was like birdsong in the morning or something like that. And so the birds are chirping. If you need a little bit of a boost, tune into the bird song and the sun. If you need a little bit of a boost, might I interest you in my class, my upcoming class that starts tomorrow, Embodying Abundance. If you are listening to this on Wednesday the 17th, sign up ends this morning and we start tomorrow. This is a comprehensive class where we explore ideas and practices of abundance, scarcity. We look at money. We look at taking aligned action. It's where I teach everything I know about moving from a mostly scarcity-minded, scarcity-attuned nervous system and energetic pattern to an abundant one. It's everything I know about it, which has a large component of somatics. It has some nervous system education and practices. We are also going to take an additional ethical investing class. There is also going to be yoga for abundance. There's going to be, on top of that, additional classes that I'll be teaching and other facilitators will be teaching. I'm trying to make this as comprehensive and what I really needed, however many years ago when I got into the world and needed to start thinking about operating from places of resource and confidence and worth. And wow, have I learned a lot. And wow, will running your own business completely off your own energy, completely off your own creativity, completely off your own gifts. Wow, will that teach you a lot about where that sneaky scarcity is hiding out and how we can bring it more resource. In Embodying Abundance, we're not trying to eradicate scarcity or override it. Rather, we're going to be interrogating it, doing our shadow work with it, transforming it, and also making it less scary. We're not going to avoid it. We're not going to sugarcoat it. We're going to be with it for long enough for it to give us more information about what it needs to share with us, how it shows up, what lessons it has for us. And we're going to practice being in abundance and practice what that looks like for us, not only around money. I'm having one night lecture workshop be about money, but it's really looking like a lot of folks are going to be in this year's cohort around time. And so I've been doing a lot of my own research and my own practice around time, because that's mine right now. That's my scarcity point right now. It's time, and it's the community, but I know I have to really put time at the forefront of what I'm practicing. So folks come in with all kinds of things they want to give more abundance to: love, career, friendship, money, time, self, creativity, whatever it is. It's really great. I love it. It changes people's lives. We always put testimonials in our newsletters, but not in the podcast. But it changes people's lives. People literally will write in and let us know that it's changed their income. It's changed certain relationships that they have. It's changed their art practice. And this is why I do what I do. I am here to facilitate transformation in the best ways I know how, which includes mind, body, spirit, practice, action, with some criticality, some philosophy, some tools and techniques that work at a pace that works for you. And all the courses are designed to meet you where you are. We also have a private online community that is really awesome, because did I mention the folks that sign up for the longer courses and all the courses? Really awesome. Why? Because you're listening to this, you're here. Let's get on with the show. If you have any questions, you can email the studio about embodying abundance. Like I said, it will not be offered again this year. We're doing other stuff. And even if I don't see you in the class container, I really hope that the series of episodes that we did to kick off season 6 are helping you reflect on abundance, scarcity, how it's showing up, if it's showing up in your life. And we're ending our little series, our little bouquet, our little cluster, with a really great interview with some really awesome people. Today on Moonbeaming, we have Hello Universe. Hello Universe, the podcast, our guests on Moonbeaming. Hello Universe is a deep dive into what it means to be an ever-expanding speck of cosmic space dust. Equal parts irreverent and esoteric, Kyley and Eva host vulnerable, down-to-earth conversations about this messy, electric human journey. So we have Kyley and Eva. Eva Liao is a spiritual mentor and meditation teacher for the curious and devoted. And Kyley Caldwell is a shadow work coach, business coach, and mystic who works at the intersection of money, magic, and the wounded parts of ourselves that we'd rather reject. Our conversation today is vulnerable. We talk a lot about money, and we talk a lot about shame, and we talk about how to be with and transform shame, particularly shame around money. But we can also look to what money represents, which is not enough, too much, guilt, ancestry stuff, societal stuff, conditioning stuff. Whenever we're talking about such a loaded topic about work or money, we're always talking about other things, right? So we get into all of that. We get into the underneath of all of that. This was such a wonderful, honest, open, vulnerable conversation about topics we need to be talking about more openly, at least in my humble opinion, in the year 2023 Gregorian calendar, of course. So I present to you today on the show, Kyley Caldwell and Eva Liao. Hello, hello, hello. I am so excited to have two, not one, not three, but two very special guests today on the show. I have Kyley Caldwell and Eva Liao of Hello Universe, a podcast I'm sure you know about. Welcome to Moonbeaming, you two.
Thank you. We're so excited to be
Hey.
here.
I love this. Do you mind just introducing yourself one by one so folks can be like, oh, this is Eva? Oh, just so folks get a handle on what your name is, what your voice is, what you're doing currently, what you're interested in
I'm
currently.
going to make Kyley go first. I feel like she usually makes me go first. So you're in the hot seat.
That's fair. I am Kyley, and I am a coach on shadow work, money, and business for witchy entrepreneurs. And particularly, the space I always hold is wanting to hold space for the tender thing under the thing, so to speak. So, yeah, that's me.
And I'm Eva Liao. To keep it simple, if I have to explain it to someone in an airport, I'll just say I'm a meditation teacher because I think people can understand that. But really what I do is I help people who are really dedicated to their peace, deepen their spiritual practice and deepen their spiritual self and connection to God without needing to run away from that word in like a heebie-jeebie kind of way.
Oh, yes, there's already so much there that we can get into both of you. Yeah. So maybe I'll start with in both of your personal practices and how you support clients. I know there's such a wide spectrum, right, of what people are dealing with, but I'm really curious because both of you work one-on-one with people and you both work really intimately with folks, often for periods of time. First of all, I want to know what led you both to doing work that is, for lack of a better word, intense?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm just going to dive right in. I am intense. I am an intense person. I remember I dated a guy once who actually said it in a bad way. He's like, "You're really intense." And I got so self-conscious about it. I was like, and thankfully I had some friends talk me off the ledge about this is what we like about you. You got to find your people. So I think because I like to go to the heart of the matter. Everything else is boring. It's let's just get right into it and get into the juicy stuff because I don't know, everything else seems just not quite it. So I just, I don't know if I decided to choose to go into something intense, but I just think that it's part of how I am. And I mean that in a good way. I don't shy away from the hard or the uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, underscore, I don't have that particular X, but co-sign to everything Eva said. I am also a very intense person, and so much so that it wouldn't even occur to me that this is intense until you point it out. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess holding space for people's deep trauma around money might be kind of an intense career path to have chosen. But I also think for me, and I feel like you guys probably feel similarly, holding space for my clients is often also so much I am in the soup with my clients, right? And so I always feel so honored by people's willingness to share their journey and be vulnerable with me because I think together we're building something. So every time I walk out of a client session, I feel so much of me is in them and so much of them is in me that I feel like we're just holding space together to forge a new path. And that feels like just such a freaking honor.
Yes, I definitely am intense. I definitely have had, and this I know comes up, I'm sure, with some of your clients and maybe with you. Definitely there's the too much, which is, being told oh, you're too much, or your interests are too much, or your ambitions are too much. All of that, it's too much, which I think also dovetails into money stuff of not enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's never like Goldilocks porridge. It's either not enough or it's too much, or so I think I'm curious too about conversations that I have witnessed being had around money is also very divisive or very dualistic, where if you want to make more money, you're a greedy bitch.
Yeah.
If you don't want to have money, what's wrong with you? Like if you can't, people have so much shame around debt or around mishandling funds, or there's a lot of guilt, or there's so much. The word I really want to put like caps lock for y'all to start composting and breaking down and being in with all of us is shame.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
And I was just talking about how shame is also shame. There can be good shame. There can be the signal of, oh, maybe I misstepped, or maybe I said something wrong, or, and there's the shame of, I call it the shame void, which is you're wrong. You're never going to be enough. You're just wrong. There's no way out. You're stuck in a bad kind of void, not a liminal, exciting, like glimmery kind of void of possibility, but you're just trapped in this shame well, maybe is better, or shame box.
I call it a shame room.
The shame room. There we go.
I will say, oh, I'm back in the shame room.
Because I think like shame, I think in culture, we've at least begun to tiptoe around trauma. We're becoming more okay with talking about trauma and making space for trauma and trauma literacy and education. I feel like shame is this other aspect to trauma that even can sometimes block or stop us from healing trauma or moving forward. So I'd love for both of you to kind of riff or share some things that have occurred to you around shame, how shame shows up, how you've maybe been with shame, your client's shame, friend's shame, each other's shame, whatever. Because I think we need to start having that conversation too of like, what is shame? How can we befriend it? How can we think of it and be with it differently? Or else it's just going to keep shutting us down.
Okay, I could not love this more.
I feel like
he was laughing.
This is like a regular Wednesday for me and Kyley. We're always talking about shame, so we're ready to go.
And in this chapter of my life, I feel like some of my biggest teachers are motherhood. I have 2 small kids. Money and shame have been like just these huge teachers. So, and in particular, the way in which money and shame have been wrapped around themselves really for the entirety of my existence until I started to unravel them. There's a lot to say on this topic, and I'm really glad you're bringing it up. I think I really like Brene Brown's definition of shame versus guilt, that guilt is the idea that you've done something bad, and shame is the idea that you are bad. And trauma is a really big reason that we have this core rotten apple center feeling that we are bad. And the complexity of shame is that, we build a lot of resilience around holding space for our grief and holding space for our anger and holding space for all these complicated emotions. But shame is a wildly painful emotion to actually sit with and be present with, because it signals to every fiber of you that you are inherently bad and therefore can't be loved, can't be taken care of, can't be resourced, right? And so we tend to respond to shame by disassociating, running away from it. And also, one of the many reasons why money and shame get wrapped around each other is because money is given to us as this promise of like the golden ticket, right? So because shame is so painful, we're constantly trying to escape it and looking for anything like maybe a love relationship, maybe a promotion, and money is a really big, if you just get more money, everything will be better. And what I find again and again is that either people's money stays stagnant, or they get more money and lose it, or they get more money and continue to feel wildly uncomfortable because money is the proxy through which they are processing this really, really deep shame that actually isn't about money, although you might be processing it through money. And so building up a tenacity to actually be present with your own shame while knowing it is a wildly uncomfortable thing to do is actually, I think, one of the most profound and compassionate ways that you can begin to create a new diverging experience with money.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I will add a couple of things to that. So you talked about how, trauma and shame are related. And something that I think is really important is that for a lot of us who experience trauma at a very young age, what happens is maybe I'll speak for myself. In my case, I had caretakers who were kind of doing messed up things and who were not necessarily there for me the way that I needed them to be. And I internalize that, when we're young, what happens is we think, okay, well, it's too dangerous and scary to think that our caretakers that we are 100% reliant on, that they could be bad. Like I can't, we can't process that because that's scary. So instead we have to turn it around to ourselves and say, oh, no, it turns out I must be the problem. I must be bad. And then you go around life thinking that all the time. And if we want to put that into like the context of money, then it's like, that's why everything is bad. Like buying the expensive cheese at the market. Oh, you're bad. You're spending too much money at Target. You're bad. You're not donating enough money, or you're making too much money. You can make too much money also, and then be like, you're also an asshole, So it's just this internalized, in terms of like my Buddhist practice, we talk about it a lot, about, original purity, which is what the Buddha teaches, that like actually we are all born inherently good, versus original sin, which is what we learn in religion, which is God says, well, you're messed, you came out of the womb messed up and you have to repent for the rest of your life. And so it's this deep message that's ingrained in us for various reasons, but something that Kyley and I both talk about a lot is like, well, what do you do with the shame, right? I think that's kind of what you're asking. And simply put, I think both of what we help people with our magic in various ways is like, you just love your shame so much that it can no longer control you, because that's the only way out. The only way out is love, which means that then you can be with your shame instead of needing to run away from it, because that's usually the default. It's shame is uncomfortable. I get why we want to run away, but if you have like the capacity for love, you'll see that everything will change and dissolve.
Yeah. I want to add one more thing to that too, which is that because shame is so like hot to touch, right?
It burns really.
It really does. I also think if you have a deep shame in money, and you have someone with trauma, this isn't like random happenstance. And I would invite you to like be held, even if it's like a good friend, right? If it's a therapist, if it's a coach, but because shame is such an intense experience, there's almost like a plant medicine vibe to shame. I think a way it can be an initiation. And I think treat yourself gently as you tend to shame, which might be you like touch the stove for 2 seconds and then you back away, or you like resource yourself with emotional support rather than just in a truly capitalist fashion, expect yourself to just rip the shame band-aid off and get over it and then fix your, money story.
I've been thinking a lot about, I think it was Rebecca Solnit. There are many other teachers, including Buddhist teachers, who share this sentiment though. And Eva, you might be able to like, oh yeah, it's, as you're speaking, the freedom of hopelessness in terms of shame maybe never going away. Because I think we can get so, especially people in so-called healing spaces or in so-called wellness spaces, we think that there's a point, an end goal where, we've healed. I've also talked about how I'm a bit allergic to the word healed or healing, because often I don't expect myself to be maybe even 90% healed by the time I leave this planet. So I'm healing, or I'm recovering, or I'm being with, or I'm finding ways to navigate shape-shifting things, or I'm finding ways to relate to somatic experiences or nervous system experiences or habits or ancestral epigenetics that can't be avoided, right? That I have to sit, as you said, I have to sit with the shame. And I think dropping, for me, I have this other concept I call toxic expectations, which are these, it's self-explanatory when you're like expecting something and I will be happy then. When I make, first it was $10,000 a month. Then it was $100,000 a month. Then it was 1 million. And at that point, you're like, okay, you are a sociopath. Like, like, what are we doing here, buddy? So I think like letting go of the expectation that my shame will just not ever leave its shame room, like it will be there, and it'll show up, and it might show up in weird ways. It might be unexpected. It might really F me over, but being able to recognize it when it's there. And so I was hoping if both of you could share strategies and practices that you do with yourself and your clients that help you be with the shame in a way so that the shame is not overtaking you, but you're being with these sensations and stories.
Yeah, I mean, I love this question. I'll start by saying that we first have to not judge ourselves when we feel shame. Like Kyley actually helped me with this recently where she had to I messaged her about something and she gave me the compassion of generosity, but reminding me that actually shame is here to teach me something and show me something, which is really helpful because what I see so often is that we have a judgment about it sometimes. And then that means we can't even, that's already, you've cut off access to it because you're trying to think that it shouldn't be there. So compassion, I really think, is a huge piece of it. And then for me, it is a lot about somatic work. So when I have a client, or I'll speak for myself, or when I'm with a client, I'll ask them where they feel it in their bodies. Because as a reminder, I think we forget this, but emotions are like what I tell people, it's like emotion, it's energy in motion. It's something that's literally felt through your body through sensation. It's not even intellectual thing. And so I really invite people to be like, okay, can you, and this is where like meditative practice can come in, but it's like, where do you find it in your body? Can you feel the sensation of it? What does it feel like? And I referenced earlier that it feels like burning, maybe your throat's burning or your belly's burning. And what's so interesting, I find, is oftentimes it's our resistance to feeling it that is causing the suffering. Because you're like, no, I don't want to feel this. Conversely, I think unconditional love to me is saying, oh, I feel this in my body and I'm going to let it in. I'm going to let it in and completely be there. And this is what the paradox, I think, of life is when you don't resist it, then it moves through you. Again, the energy in motion. And so there's this beautiful thing where you begin to realize that you don't have to be afraid of your feelings or the sensations. It's really quite liberating. And Kyley, I'll pass it to you because I know that you have lots of thoughts on this always.
I'm just smiling and soaking up your wisdom. Yes, I love everything you just shared, and I would add, I want to build off of this idea of it's the resistance to the feeling that causes actually the most discomfort. And I say this with great compassion because, again, shame's not comfortable. So it's very reasonable that we avoid feeling it. And I specifically have found tremendous space shows up when we start to notice the difference between fixing and feeling and our own tendency to fix, which I think, again, it shows up with any emotion that we are uncomfortable with. So for money, this might look like you start to feel anxiety and dread and shame about how much money there is or is not. And your mind starts whirling and it starts coming up with solutions and it starts coming up with actions. And those aren't wrong. And I will never make those wrong. And also, if you're in a moment of kind of emotional intensity, there's something so profound about giving yourself permission to drop out of fixing and just, even if it's just for a moment, right? You can tell your fix itself, like, we will take action in a moment. We will take action tomorrow. Right now, my body is on fire. And the kindest thing I can do is actually to sit in that rather than try to like wallpaper it over with solutions. And that takes a little bit of time to build that habit because it's so ingrained to be like, first of all, our culture really reinforces like just fix the problem, right? And especially with money, it's even more so. Like this is why I'm so passionate about kind of the emotional undercurrents of money because it's so under discussed. It's a practice, right? This pivoting from fixing into feeling. And also what I find is as someone who, had a long, intimate relationship with shame, and now feels like on pretty friendly terms with my shame, I have found the drowning feeling of it has really tremendously softened over time by just incremental doses of compassion. Because if you think about it, the core story here is that I am unworthy of love. So when you actually drop in and witness the feeling, you are sending that story to this wounded part of yourself that they are worthy of love. And so it starts to dissolve, I think, the intensity. And to your point, I love your point of like, shame is actually always there, right? Because all of these parts of us are always there. But I believe we begin to experience an integration instead of that kind of fractured self feeling.
100%. I love that so much. And for me personally, one of the hardest things to do, but similar to what you're saying, one of the more profound shifts is really calling in the compassionate witness, to allow a compassionate witness to come in. And even, some spiritual traditions invoke prayer, or, a lot of, with my own work, I'll give it away to an angel when I believe something is too heavy for me to carry, or I feel like I cannot let go of this on my own. I will invoke in, greater support for myself. And I think that practicing the compassionate witness, if you yourself cannot be the compassionate witness while you're feeling the shame, because parts work can be complicated and can be a bit of a, paradigm shift, for lack of a better word, for certain people, accessing different parts of yourself, I think can be really useful for that. And then you can bring in the compassionate witness when you're not super activated, right? When you're looking in the mirror and you're like, oh, like Kyley looks cute today. You've got your hair looks good and you're feeling pretty good. You had a nice text message with someone. Like, you can then bring in that compassionate witness when one isn't activated, to then try to access that, so that when you are really activated, you can feel any kind of other sensation that will dissolve it. And I'll share one more thing, and then I wanted to talk more about what some of your other thoughts are, or what have changed things for you. One thing also is really asking the sensation what it wants to turn into.
Yeah.
Or what it needs.
Mm-hmm.
Or what it would need to dissolve it, or what it would need to feel heard or seen or safe. And when I do this with clients, I also ask them to not force logic.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they're like, it needs balloons. Or sometimes they're like, oh, it needs a 7-year vacation. And like, that's just not probably going to happen,
Yeah.
Or like, it's so tired, like it is so, usually it's like a lot of exhaustion, it is just so flipping tired, and it needs a 3-year nap, that's like our protector parts, are those kinds of the manager parts, they've just been working for so long, for so hard to avoid this, self-concept that they could be wrong or whatever. So there's that. But I was wondering if there was anything for both of you, either in your own practice or with clients, around shame that was really fascinating or interesting, that helped shift things, or that has been something you teach or take with you in your practice.
I'll share because something's coming to mind right away. Which is that it's always shocking that shame makes us want to hide, right? Because we're like, oh, I'm bad. And well, even when I feel in my body, I just want to shrivel up and make sure no one sees me. But what I have found to be so interesting is that it's actually so helpful to be witnessed in your shame. Like, if you are just in a shame spiral and you're just like, oh, I feel so gross. If you are in a safe space where someone can like watch you process that shame and like witness that experience, and you're just like crying tears and you've got like snot running down your face, there's something I think incredibly, healing, I guess you could use the word, about letting someone else see your shame and saying like, and also, oh, actually, this is totally okay. So I just think it points to the fact that shame wants to isolate us, when oftentimes the solution is that we need each other, and this work is not meant to be done alone. Yeah. It's just the opposite of what you would think. That's why I came up with this thought of like, what sounds surprising is that like, you actually want to be witnessed in your shame in a safe space.
Yeah. Yeah. I really love that. I think the thing that's coming to my mind is, as I mentioned, in my personal journey, I have continue to witness how I am processing some gnarly things that I experienced as a small child through money, right? Because reasons we've discussed already, and the way in which money is the energy of our needs being met. And so it's just like the perfect container for all this unprocessed complexity around all the ways in which our needs, quite frankly, were not met. And it's easy to have a story that I haven't figured money out yet because I am healing this journey of trauma and shame, which, to your point, is already complicated. It's a way of kind of perpetually delaying being taken care of. And I think something else that another really compassionate way to see that is also to witness money stepping in as proxy for a lot of us, right? Because actually it probably isn't safe to go back to that traumatic experience when you were 2. And so you can have a story that I'm still doing something wrong and I haven't figured it out. And that's why this pattern is happening with money. And there's an invitation to see not just money as teacher, but money actually as like really compassionate space holder for the fact that you have to get this, you have a deep desire to get this through your system and metabolized and integrated. And money's like, yeah, okay, I can hold your shame. I can hang your anger, your resentment, your fear, your grief. Like, this is why I get so mad when people say you have to be grateful to money. I'm like, if you are, sure. But if you're not, like, what happens if your relationship with money is one of deep integrity, where it can actually be big enough to hold the depth of your own, that kind of despair and pain, and it becomes a place that is safer, right? And then that builds up some resilience where you're like, okay, now we can go into 2-year-old self, right? And so I think that can just bring some compassion where we're used to judgment around, like, oh, I still have credit card debt and I still feel shame about it. And yeah, that sucks. And it is super frustrating. And there are very real material implications that show up around that. And also, it might be a way that you're being taken care of at the exact same time, because we live in paradox.
What are some practices that you utilize personally and or with clients to support folks in feeling safer around money?
Yeah, I feel like Kyley is like the money queen, and I feel like Kyley, this is her zone of genius. I feel like where I can contribute more is talking about rest and healing our relationship with productivity, because they're very much tied in with money. But I do, Kyley, I kind of want to just hand you the mic because I'm sure you have so much to share on this topic.
I mean, yeah, I do think you're the way you hold space for slowing down and unhooking from the grind is it is the same. And I think a space we will share is that a lot of it is about permission. So a lot of the work that I do is really probably similar to all three of us. It's just really, really rooted in making wherever you are not wrong, and trying to witness with my clients, like, what, I mentioned at the beginning, like, what's the thing under the thing, right? So I have a client who was recently wanting to ask for a promotion, right? And there was a lot of the phrase kept being like, well, I don't know that I know what I want, right? But as we dove in, became more clear that the question was really about, is it okay that I want what I want, right? And so for me, a lot of the process is really clarifying, okay, our mind has one story, but our somatic experience, our emotional experience, and our board of directors of inner parts have their own sensations, and trying to fall, again, out of the fixing mind into the actual, like, desire and experience can create a lot of clarity around what we want. And then I also think trying to understand what we are trying to prove with money, right? So for example, it's not uncommon that we're trying to validate our value and worth through money, because our whole flippin' world is ordered that way, right? And what ends up happening is we create this kind of like skipping inner like friction, because we want money to prove that we are valid, but we don't actually believe that we're valid. And we have this like crazy loop where, well, once I have money, then I'll be valid, and I don't have money yet, so I'm not valid, right? And so in order to then feel safe actually having money, that particular story is about like reseeding all the ways in which you are valid, independent of external stimuli. So those are kind of two different examples. There's also a lot around like safety and nervous system work. But to me, it always begins with kind of compassionate witnessing of wherever we are is not wrong, and then trying to actually sink in deep enough to understand where it is that we are and what might be driving the subconscious somatic ship.
That's all so beautiful. I love there's always that deeper level that is sort of sneaky or maybe doesn't want to be woken up, but really does and needs to be.
Yes, it's actually like desperate to be witnessed. Yeah, even as it's also like thoroughly hiding.
It's like screaming for your attention, really, which is why when it finally gets attention, it's so liberating.
And it has so much information.
Yeah.
That can then help you, right? I also think for me, whenever I can have a relationship with money that is expansive and that is more of a co-creation and less of however you're doing it is wrong, I feel more aligned with money. And so for me, it's this mix of being able to hold larger amounts of money. For me, it's also has to do with I have a bit of an Australian shepherd with money where I want money to be doing something. Like I want it to be going to a bigger plan, or I want it to be paying something, or I want a certain amount of money to be given to charity or whatever it is. Like I want it to be in flow and I want to know kind of what I'm doing with it. I find that, and again, very personal share, I found that, and I'm sure many people can relate, I've never been an unconscious shopper. Well, one, I didn't have any money to be unconscious with. And two, that just wasn't my relationship with money until 2020.
Oh.
And I found myself making purchases where I was like, who made this purchase? Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't my conscious frontal lobe. It was some other part of me. And when I don't make purchases that are not in my integrity, then I do start to feel bad. And when I do feel like I'm, in quote, wasting money or, it's just not quite right, I start to judge myself and I start to shame myself. And it was a very weird thing that popped up that I both completely am not surprised by and also am like, what? What the heck? And I think that it's useful for folks to think about a co-creation. Like, what would you like your money to do for you? How is money going to feel really good or in at least reciprocity? If money is neutral, let's just say, what would you like it to be a proxy for?
I love that. Can I add one more thing too, which is that I think that story that you just shared is such a perfect example of like a moment of friction with money, right? Which we all have plenty of. And I think our tendency is to see the moment of friction as, well, it's something unpleasant and also something to correct. Not that that's what you're saying in this instance, but it is often, at least like that's our judging part that shows up. And I think something really, really, really big starts to happen when we see those moments of friction with money as portals, right? And so if you're looking at being in relationship with money, well, if you think about like the most loving relationships that you have, there's open communication, right? Which means like if I am feeling burning resentment at my husband for months on end and I don't say anything to him, I am not in right relationship, right? And so I had this actually like tremendous emotional breakthrough the other day that started with me being really fucking sorry. Can I swear on this podcast?
I think we've already gone there.
I was really resentful of money. Like I was bitterly resentful. And it was not about money at all. It was about like an abandonment wound and 6-month-old Kyley, right? But I wouldn't have got to that tremendous breakthrough if I had talked myself out of the resentment, right? If I had said like, look at all the blessings that you have, which is true. I am tremendously blessed, right? But if I had like walked myself away from those complicated emotions, I would have robbed myself of an opportunity to love myself deeper. Mm-hmm. And so I invite my clients again and again that when you come to that point of friction, notice the story, note which is like overspending, say, and then notice the emotions underneath that, which are totally different for each person. And then ask the parts of you that are associated with those emotions, what they are hungry for, what kind of witnessing they need. Because then these moments of frustration, how many times with money we're like, I'm doing the same thing again. I'm doing the same thing again. I'm doing the same thing again. Because it's the same part of you that's like, still asking for attention. Yep. Still bitter me who didn't get chosen, at 6 months old, still bitter about that. Right. And so, how we break cycles, is actually by meeting the cycle and the frustration with like tremendous compassion and curiosity. And it can be pretty revolutionary.
One thing that I want to add to that is this is the spiritual path. When I started talking about people, when I work with people who are dedicated to their peace and their spiritual path, it means that understanding what's in the way, whatever it is the way. That's the whole game. Whatever you think is in the way, that's your portal to liberation. And so when you start, it's like in my opinion, a much more fun and courageous way to live life instead of feeling like everything is just like a problem. So money can be a spiritual thing for sure. Rest is definitely a spiritual thing. This idea of like, how many of us oftentimes think we don't have enough time? I don't have enough time. We're like exploiting time. And it's wherever we notice tension, that's a beautiful indicator of like where we're just not yet free, but it's the invitation where we can get free.
Do you want to talk about rest?
Yeah, rest. What do we want to say about rest? I think the way that I like to, the framework that I often want to offer people is understanding that oftentimes our relationship with productivity is like a trauma response because we're in hypervigilant mode. So it can be hard to see because we're rewarded for being really, really productive. And so we get a pat on the back and everyone thinks you're great. But underneath that, it's actually like, wait, what if the only reason we are so freaking hypervigilant is because we're afraid that if we slow down, we're not going to be worthy, or that we're going to have to like look at some stuff that we don't want to address. So I think it also gives people a little bit of compassion for themselves too, because they're understanding that they're being driven in this way that's not necessarily their fault. It's like, it's the systems that we are in. And also oftentimes it is this like, oh, I now understand this is coming from a hurt place of like, I'm so afraid of not being worthy that I just have to like run myself into the ground. And I think once we begin to see that clearly, we start to see that this is an illusion. It's an illusion. There's like, and again, once you see something, that moment of awareness is just like, sometimes I think awareness is 80% of the game. It's like you see something clearly and that can be enough for you to start shifting things. Yeah. I could talk about rest like all day. I don't know. I'm curious about your thoughts.
I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about ways to wake up from the illusion.
Oh, it's, let's start with the simple. I think it's looking at how many times in your day and where in your day are you stressed out about time or how much you've gotten done. So for me, like that's all the time. It's all the time. And so that noticing in itself is you beginning to understand that, oh, you're just being run by this constant fear. But the illusion is simply looking at reality, because if you're really tracking, honestly, you'll see that every time you finished doing something or finally completing something, it didn't answer your problems. It didn't make it go away. It's still continuously there. And the waking up process is finally seeing like, oh, you're trying to fill a bottomless well. Like there's no end to it. And so you start to say, sometimes we get angry, which I think is an appropriate response, because you're like, oh my God, like if I didn't notice this, I would have been doing this until I was 80 and I still wouldn't have gotten to where I wanted to go. And then I would have wasted my life being in the future instead of just being here right now. And I think there's grief that comes with that. And that's totally okay. The grief is the medicine, because you're like, it's the medicine where you're like, I don't want to do that anymore because I know it's a painful way to live.
My friend says, grief is my synchronicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a clear sign that they're moving on, that they've had some kind of breakthrough, that they have put something to rest, that, you know, they're opening in a different way, and that they can be more perhaps in present time and not so much tending to that loss or tending to that shame or tending to that guilt or whatever that may be. You know, I think also I'm hearing you say that the biggest hashtag life hack is presence
Yeah. Yeah.
and being in present time.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I just want to say thank you first, actually, for that little gift about grief, because I really felt that in my whole body. It was like there was something really beautiful about it. But yeah, presence. Yeah, I partly I could feel like I could say so much about presence, but the funny thing is like I think it's almost the paradox that if there was such a thing as a shortcut, there isn't. But if there were, I think presence is kind of it, because when we're thinking the way, I mean, many of you may already know this, but the way that the brain works is that when we are thinking about the future, that's what causes anxiety, right? And when we're thinking about the past, that's what causes us grief. And so it's actually not very effective. It's where all of my like energy leaks to, and then I'm exhausted. But and I think people are like, oh, but if I stay present, then I'm not going to get anything done. I'm like, no, homie, like you stay present and you get so much done. Like, and it's not for the act of getting things done,
Sure.
but it's
Yeah.
just if we want to think about being efficient with your energy, like being present is the whole game, which then actually goes, I feel like this is a really great callback to everything we've been saying about shame and emotions, because sometimes what comes up in the present is shame or your really heavy emotions. And so this is the whole trick. I'm saying trick in air quotes, but it's like, okay, so can I be with my experience on a moment by moment basis? And if we can strengthen our nervous system, then it's like, oh, and I can be with shame, and I can be with discomfort, and I can be with overwhelming joy. So yeah, it's kind of about like not resisting anything that comes at you, which is a tall order.
100%. And I also, again, this is like why Buddhism exists and why many Eastern spiritual traditions, and even I study Kabbalah, I'm thinking about some similar kinds of thoughts. But when we can be in the present, and when we have some aspect, doesn't have to be all of us, but it can be an aspect of us that is mindful, that is centered, that is in present moment, we can be so much more aware of our patterns, of which part of us is trying to run the show, you know. But the minute we feel like, the minute we, it's like this interesting thing about integration, where I feel as though integration offers us more opportunities to almost compartmentalize aspects of ourself and be, you know, meditation does that too, right? You're like, oh, these are just my thoughts, silly thoughts, like really rude thoughts. You are not me thoughts. You're running the show. And then we bring in our present self to help us with somatics, or we discharge energy, or we take a walk, or we cry, or we call a friend, or whatever that may be. But how we break patterns is by staying in the present, and is by being aware of which aspect of our mind, which aspect of ourself is really like, it's really lovely. A nice reframe to think of that you're inspiring me, both of you, to think of is like, just like a lovely little part of us that needs love, that wants compassion, that wants to be seen, that might be afraid, that needs reassurance, that might have something interesting to say, that we have to be able to hold space for, which is so counter to capitalism, right? It's like, whoa, no, you got to go. You can't, you just got to go. You just got to keep going. Like urgency, like that we can't sit in a circle and just chit chat, like, so yeah, it does feel like rest or restfulness or softness or openness, and or, right, it can be an antidote to the ways in which we turn some of this external programming in on ourselves.
Can I add one more thing too, which is an edge for me is that I often feel pressure to make my presence productive, meaning I get really perfectionist about it, right? Like I know that I feel best when I'm present. And as a result, I like make it this achievement thing with me, for me, right? And I basically take myself out of the present by putting all this on,
Judgment.
totally
Yeah.
judgment and pressure and what something that I have actually found real space in is actually just naming when I'm disassociating. Like I mentioned I had this pretty big breakthrough just yesterday, and I'm still kind of processing it today. And I was messaging my friend about it. She's like, "Oh man, this is really big. How are you?" And I was like, "Right now I'm disassociating and eating Cheerios. How are you?" And like also earlier today, I spent a long time reading my book while my kids were playing and was like, okay, the presence is like the resting of my body and inviting my mind to be like, there's nothing to do here. Right. And so I just want to offer that, if you are, ambitious, recovering perfectionist, that presence is not something that you have to do right.
Yeah.
It's very much an edge for me, but, wanted to drop it in.
Yeah. I mean, if you could do presence right all the time, you'd be enlightened already.
Right. Well, that's the whole thing. I'm like, hurry up, Caldwell. What is taking you so long?
Yeah.
This has been really good. I could talk to both of you forever. I'm so grateful for both of your time, your vulnerability, your generosity. I feel like this conversation is a mini course on reprogramming around not just money, but patterns, shame, guilt.
Yeah. I'd say colonialism and capitalism and the patriarchy.
100%. So, like, you're welcome, everyone. You're welcome. This is just us on a Wednesday, this is us on a Wednesday. So I would love for both of you to share. Obviously, you have your joint collaboration, Hello Universe, the podcast. Obviously, everything you share will be linked in our show notes. But for those of you who would love to hear about how they can work with both of you or with one of you or both of you simultaneously, please share your info, share what you have going on, how folks can work with you, and all of that wonderful, juicy stuff.
Okay, so for people who are interested, I love working with people with their meditation, deepening that practice. And it really includes a lot of what we talked about here, nervous system stuff, presence. And yeah, you know what? I'll just keep it simple. And also really the core of my work is what I call one-on-one spiritual mentorship. So if meditation isn't your thing, but you're like, I am dedicated to my spiritual practice and being in connection with God, that's my jam. You can find me at evaliao.com, and my Instagram is I am Eva Liao.
And if folks liked this topic, I have a free mini course on money and shame and how it's our story of conditional love versus unconditional love. So you can get that at KyleyCaldwell.com. And I think that will be a lovely resource for folks. I have a million projects going all the time, but if someone was interested in a deeper dive with me, the most relevant is actually my money course, which is called Alchemy. And it's about this, right? It's about the crucible of the deep and complicated, sometimes traumatic things that are wrapped around money and providing the safe space to witness them, see them. It's a 5-month program. It involves a virtual retreat. I host it with my other co-collaborator when I'm not with Eva, my friend Liz Simpson, who is a somatic practitioner, among other things. And so check out the free course. If you want to just go straight into the deep end, come check out our alchemy program. And if you enjoy our vibe, definitely come check us out on the Hello Universe podcast. We have a lot of fun.
Yay. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.
That's our show. If you liked this episode, I went on Hello Universe a long time ago. And by a long time ago, I think I mean a couple months ago. And so you can go on their feed and check that out. We started talking about work and money, and we knew we wanted to continue the conversation. So that's why I invited them on Moonbeaming, because I was having so much fun chatting with the two of them. So if you want to check that out, definitely check out Hello Universe. I'm sure some of you are already listening to Hello Universe. And of course, check out all their offerings. If you liked what you heard, check out what they also have to offer. All of the links, of course, are in the show notes, as well as so many links. There's so many links you can check out in the show notes. Don't ever say we didn't link ya. All right. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. I will see you back here real soon. Thank you, Patreons. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, reviewers. Thank you, birds. Thank you, microphone. Thank you, computer. Thank you, the person who invented the word podcast. It's so weird, but I think I like it. Have a wonderful, wonderful week and be good to yourselves and one another. Bye.